Just a privilege to be in partnership with you. So we just appreciate everything, and we just couldn't be happier with the way things are going.
Well, that's a great way to start, Daryl. Daryl Zimmerman, everybody, with Grace Place Wellness Ministries, and it's the same. Ditto. It is a privilege to be in partnership with you guys as well.
Certainly second that from our perspective as those, Jason and I, we were in ministry together. We started a church together. We've worked with a lot of churches around the country, but we know, and we have plenty of our own friends, own stories to tell of burnout in that world. But that's where you guys are working right now, which I think makes it so essential, and why we are so excited to partner with you guys, and the content that you're producing and some of the things that you're rolling out soon, and we want to get to all that. But to continue the introduction, we're here with Daryl Zimmerman, Reverend Dr. Daryl Zimmerman, who's the Executive Director of Grace Place Wellness Ministries. And I'd love to just go through your story briefly and what led you to your current role and your own story in that process. How'd you get started down this path?
Yeah, I was in parish ministry for about 30 years, and right at the midpoint, at one of the most trying times, I got an invitation in the year 2000 to the first Grace Place Wellness Retreat. This was the idea of a doctor, a physician here in St. Louis area. He had a large number of Lutheran church workers, pastors, educators, and their families in his client base, and he was impressed by the unusual degree of stress-related illness. And these pastors who could fake it on Sunday, look at me, we got it all together, our perfect little family. You get in the doctor's office, and he's looking at the holes in your stomach, and he says, what's going on? And pastors would get real vulnerable and share the story. So he had a dream of, let's get these people away for a week, teach them how to take care of themselves. And my wife and I got invited kind of as a last-minute substitution to the first retreat, led some retreats afterwards. It was a turning point for us. And then 12 years later, I got the call to be the first full-time director of the program. So for the last 8 years, I've been traveling the country and around the world, really, leading retreats, doing workshops on wellness.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I love that because I feel like I've been there when, in the need for that. And I think there's no small need for it in our culture. I think the wave of ministry meltdown is only beginning, especially as churches have had the ability to grow and facilitate ministry for more and more and more people. I think that all of a sudden the burden puts it on there. And I think, that just weighs the pressure. I led a smaller church compared to like some of the thousands and thousands, and the pressure is no less for the small as well. Doesn't matter the size of your ministry. I think the pressures of ministry are heavy. And I think the wave of burnout and marriages that are melting down and physical health deterioration and just I think we're just at the beginning of that wave. And so
it's an amazing thing at our retreats to gather pastors and their wives around a table. And we'll see the lead pastor of a mega church sitting at a table for a week with the pastor of a little country church and finding out they have a lot more in common than they realized. Yeah, that we're all going through this. It's the same burden of carrying the cross that Jesus told his disciples about. If you follow me, this is going to be a hard road. That ministry is really great, but it's hard.
Yeah. Well, if you could speak to this, when you bring that up, I'm just, I also read the passage where Jesus is like, hey, my burden's going to be easy. The yoke's going to be light. And to be honest, it didn't feel easy or light. My question is, if you get to that place of burnout and exhaustion where it feels heavier and heavier and can you get back to a place of the land of easy burdens and light yokes? It might still have difficulties. It might still have the challenges of ministry, but can you get to a place where if you've already at the place of burnout where you're like ready to tap out, is there hope for a pastor to get from there back to thriving?
Yeah, one of our favorite passages, really the poster boy for church worker burnout and renewal, is Elijah, that immediately after the victory on the top of Mount Carmel, he collapses under the broom tree and he says to God, I can't go on. It's over. It's done. I'm no better than my ancestors who are all dead. And my favorite part of 1 Kings 19, my favorite passage, is the Lord is speaking to Elijah and he says, go back the way you came. And he says, there's a whole new season of ministry for you. And I think the point of that story, the reason it's in the scripture, is for church workers to realize we're human beings. And the burdens are too much to bear unless the Lord himself comes alongside. And Jesus, who said, who showed us what it meant to carry his own cross, he's the one who says, if you depend on me, if you remain humble, if you remember how human you are, then I can enter in, I can come along and bear that burden of the cross with you. And there's every chance for renewal. We've seen it just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times again in our ministry of people who said, I thought I was done. But we're going back into another season of ministry.
Yeah. You mentioned, the without the Lord's help, and I love that. I think, that we weren't made for it and without his help. But then when I was at a place of exhaustion and burnout and I wasn't being my best self in my marriage, I wasn't being my best self in my own, thoughts even, I had very well-intentioned leaders and friends say, well, you just need to pray more. And so my fear is when some hear, hey, you can't do it unless God's with you, then it sounds like that. But I know your content well enough to know you guys have this whole holistic when you talk about wellness, you're not just talking about spiritual wellness. You're talking about hit some of that. Tell us about the wellness wheel and the wholeness wheel that you guys teach on.
Yeah, I think the key really is to realize that the healing ministry of Jesus continues today. That it's not about, wow, I'm going to have to pick up this cross and slug through it for another day, for another week. How am I going to make it? But rather, it's about Christ coming and the outpouring of his Spirit and working his gift of healing in the midst of our brokenness. What the wellness wheel does for us, it's just a little paradigm, a little model that talks about 8 aspects of wellness. Around the rim of the wheel is spiritual well-being. Right at the center is baptismal well-being. And then the other segments are relational, intellectual, emotional, and then vocational well-being, as well as physical and financial. And what we try to teach in the wellness wheel is, do you have a way to ask yourself, how am I doing? Because pastors and church workers have a great practice of asking everybody else, how are you doing? How are you doing? But never stopping to ask themselves, how am I doing? And the wellness wheel gives a way to ask, how am I doing spiritually, baptismally, what my identity in Christ, what he's done for me, relationally, vocationally. And when you find that place where it's hurting, to stop and to say, Lord, I can't fix this, but I need your healing grace. Come to me now. Here I am humbled before you. Things were said yesterday. Promises were not kept yesterday. Some of them on my part, some of them on other people's parts. I haven't been a great husband and father. Lord, forgive me, give me grace, heal me. and let's go at it and try again. And vocationally, to come together with the congregation and the called workers together, and to say what's going well, what's not going so well. Okay, let's be honest. I'm not perfect. I'm a human being. I'm giving it my best shot. But yeah, I failed in many ways. Let's seek the Lord's grace. Let's seek His healing, and then dive in again together. And that's why we call it Grace Place. What Dr. Eckridge was really trying to create in these retreats was that place of grace. And it's always so interesting to us, the pastors who are so good about preaching grace to other people. Oh, it's grace alone. It's grace alone. We're Lutheran, so we're big on that grace alone stuff. But then in our behavior, we act like we're trying to earn our way into heaven by working too hard, by trying to have some perfect image of this highly edited version of ourselves and our perfect little families. We don't always live by grace ourselves. So it's a tremendous irony of this profession.
You have all of these different aspects in that wholeness, which I think a lot of people in ministry feel like, hey, okay, if you're going to be in ministry, then you sacrifice a lot of those things. But it sounds like you're saying, actually, you need to do the opposite.
Yeah, it's very much the case that when we think the wellness wheel serves as a great model, a great paradigm for congregational life, that what would it be like if our churches were places where people could come and be healed? So I've got a neighbor who's financially broken. Where do we go? We take him to the church. The scriptures and talk about our finances and understanding appropriate stewardship and contentment. It's a place to come and be healed. People who've got broken relationships, who are spiritually broken, let's bring them to the church. What kind of ministry can we do if the pastor himself has not been experiencing brokenness and healing in all of those areas? That we really minister best out of our scars, the place where we've experienced woundedness, and then experienced the healing power of Christ ourselves. So, everybody's wearing their mask these days, right? Have you got one of these masks? Okay. I think this is the perfect model for what we're trying to do. That if you remember what the flight attendant says on the airplane, she says, if you're traveling with other people who depend on you, what do? Put your own oxygen mask on first. And it's a way of saying we're human. Humans make the best pastors in the first place, okay? But self-care, taking care of yourself first, is not selfish. I'm thinking about my children on the airplane with me. If daddy passes out, who's going to take care of them? And it's the same way that if church workers are thinking about caring for themselves emotionally, spiritually, vocationally, physically, financially, in all these ways, we're not doing it because we're selfish. We're doing it so that when the Lord calls, I can just throw myself into the ministry fully. If the pastor shows up at your hospital bed and you're telling him your tale of the illness and the pain you're feeling, nobody wants to hear the pastor say, oh yeah, you think you got it bad. They want us to show up at our very, very best. And so that's what we're talking about, is pastors themselves experiencing healing because they're broken in all of these areas too, so that our congregations, our churches, can be places of healing. If the pastor's going around like, oh, look at me, I've got it all together all the time, they're just destined to collapse themselves. And the work of ministry is just not going to be fruitful either.
What does that self-care look like for pastors? What do pastors usually miss in that self-care?
We find at our retreats, we'll spend 5 days going around the wellness wheel, talking about all 8 of these aspects of wellness. And then on the last day, I say, all right, now we're going to go to work on a wellness plan. What are you going to do when you get home? What are you going to address? And when we do sharing around the group, we'll have 18, 20, 30 couples together. It's all over the place that you can never guess that if you get 8 pastors around a table, one of them might say, it's this finances that's just got me completely off guard. Another one might say, my family is suffering, my marriage and my family life is suffering. Another might say, I don't even know how to worship anymore. I don't even know who God is. So it's really all over the place. The places, the causes of this brokenness, I think boil down to a couple of key things. The first is the unrealistic expectations. What churches expect of their pastors is just unbelievable. Some of the research on this says that this is not one career. It's like 13 different careers. By the time you cluster up all the different things that a pastor has to be proficient at, it's like having 13 literally different careers. A second thing I think is relationships. There's a tremendous amount of loneliness amongst pastors. Ministry is a tremendously isolating profession, and it even strains our marriages, our primary relationships. So those are a couple of the key causes, but I think then it starts to show up in all different kinds of areas. If a church worker is serving a congregation with a lot of conflict, that's always going to be a huge problem. But church workers will act this out in all different ways. Sometimes they'll have make big financial mistakes. Sometimes big relational mistakes. So yeah, it's really all over the place.
And this year's probably not made it any easier.
Yeah.
I would say it's I'm sure anyone watching would attest. This is the craziest, most intense time of ministry that any of us have ever lived through.
Yeah.
Where the need is greater, our own need is great. What do you see in the midst of, this COVID and the pandemic? What are some big pitfalls or hopefully some obstacles that you see people, missing and taking steps towards health? Maybe you see that. Maybe you see people are reaching out more now. That could be a correlation there.
Yeah, it's really true. I think the first thing is that relational kind of stuff that we talked about. In the first couple of weeks of the pandemic, I tried to check in with a lot of online worship, and I was amazed how many pastors started their online message with, I miss you, I miss you, I miss you, that we're so relational. And we get in this 7-day cycle of saying, at least on Sunday, I know I'm going to see everybody. And now all of a sudden, we don't see them. So it's that separation has been a real strain. The other thing is there's new kinds of conflict that are popping up in churches that we never imagined. It has a lot to do with the political divide. In churches, it kind of sorts into when are we going to open up for live worship, as opposed to how can you even talk about having live worship, and pastors trying to navigate that fine line. So it's the relational stuff again. It's managing conflict that's escalated in a lot of different ways, and it's that separation, the loneliness. This has been a really tough time.
Yeah, you mentioned the loneliness and the difficulty and this whole experience. A lot of that weight from our vantage, getting to connect with lots of ministries and churches around the country, a lot of that weight of ministry during this pandemic has fallen to the creative teams. Mm-hmm. But I would just call it all staffs, because I think right now, almost across the board, everybody I know who's on staff at a church is currently rewriting their own job description, or everyone who reports to them. How can a pastor in this season help their creative team, help their staff stay healthy and avoid burnout, even though, man, the burner's up high right now?
Right. Yeah, when I was lead pastor, the most important thing for me that I always felt was modeling that myself, modeling my humanness and being vulnerable with the team. I have served as a member of large church staffs where with these kind of driven pastors who were just the cruel taskmasters and more, and boy, that really doesn't help any right. When I celebrated my 25th year in the ministry, a member of my church staff gave me this little guy for a gift. Can you see what he is?
It's a sheep, a shepherd sheep, a sheep that's a shepherd.
Sheep shepherd. When Deb, our preschool director, when she gave this to me, she brought it to a staff meeting and she slid it across the table and she made a speech. She looked at me and she made this speech, and I'll never forget it. She said to me, "Don't forget." And that was it. That was the whole speech. That, we love to call you our shepherd, but don't forget you are just one of Jesus' little lambs. You're just as human as all the rest of us. And I think when lead pastors can model that, can get together with their team and say, I'm having a hard time. How about you? And where can we come alongside each other? My wife and I, Carol's a registered nurse. We used to get home about the same time, and the first thing we did was compare notes. How did your day go? And sometimes I would say, oh, okay, you win. I'll take care of you tonight. And sometimes she would say, oh, my goodness, you win. I'll take care of you tonight. And I think when ministry teams can come together and do that and say, let's check in. Who's hurting? Where is it hurting? And how can we become a we instead of just a cluster of me's out here on our own? And it begins by the lead pastor modeling that for the team and saying, being vulnerable and being open, saying, here's where I'm broken these days. And here's my plan, what I'm working on to how I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to spend a little more time with my wife, or we're cutting off meetings at 9:00 because I got to get up early and spend time with Jesus. And then for the lead pastor to check in with everybody on the team and say, do you have intentional plans to deal with your relational brokenness, your financial issues, your spiritual issues, whatever it might be? And then how do we work together for each other? I think teams go through seasons also. As we get into December, the musicians at our churches are really cranking it up, okay? And that's a time for other people to come alongside. And then maybe summertime is not quite so much that, holiday worship, and the music team can come alongside others. So it's, working together, building that body of Christ.
You've been working on some great stuff that I want to talk about in just a second. But I want to ask one more question, because I know this has been a super hard year for ministers everywhere. I wonder what you would want to say to someone who's like, yeah, I'm at that burnout place. What would you tell that church worker right now who's like, Christmas? I don't know if I'm going to make it that long.
I go back to the Elijah story. And one of the first things the Lord did when he sent Elijah back into ministry, he says, you have a partner. His name is Elisha. and I want you to go find him right away. I think the most important thing is to find that one person that you have a lot of trust and respect for, somebody who you know loves you just as a person for who you are, that you can open up with and come alongside. You know, some denominations, we have our ecclesiastical supervisors that we can go to. Certainly, your health insurance card may have an employee assistance program. You know, reach out immediately. We've just got to call in and say, hey, I'm having a hard time and I need some counseling or some coaching. But above anything else, find that peer. Maybe it's an old friend who's all the way across the country to open up with. That's the first and the most important thing. And that person will typically be able to give you some good coaching and guidance and see you through.
Awesome. Yes, definitely. And I know that you've got, you know, with Grace Place, you've been doing these retreats, you've been doing that for years, but you're looking around, especially this year, and realizing, okay, well, retreats are kind of hard right now, but you've been putting a lot of what you've been teaching, all of the material, in a book that I happen to be privileged with an advanced copy of. The book is Reclaiming the Joy of Ministry. And this comes out next year, January 18th. January 18th?
Yeah.
Where can people go to get this book?
Yeah, we're reworking our website right now with the help of ArtSpeak Creative. So it's graceplacewellness.org, and you'll find information there very soon about pre-ordering or being able to order. We'll get you connected real quickly. So the best place to go is through the website, graceplacewellness.org.
And you're producing great content all the time. I've been able to see some of that, read some of that, and you can sign up on that site for the daily devotional and jump in right away, even today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I just say one more thing to those that are watching? If you're in a spot today and you're burned out, and one, I just say you're not alone. There's, but it feels like you are, right? I think even Elijah felt like, hey, I'm the only one left, and you're not. You're not alone, nor are you the only one in ministry who's ever felt that. And I would say, I can relate to how people have felt when they made some of the worst decisions that you can make in ministry. But if you can take this moment and take the encouragement of Daryl and Kirk and I and reach out, graceplacewellness.org is a place of resource. You can message Kirk and I. We get to be a part of lots of conversations that are bringing resource and encouragement and community around these conversations about how to do ministry in our century. So you can direct message in either three of us. I'll take the liberty knowing these guys that you could message each of us on any of our channels, any of our connections, and we would love to connect with you. We'd love to help you connect to help. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for reaching out. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for reaching out to professional counseling, to reaching out to my church leadership, to getting practical resources like the book, Reclaiming the Joy of Ministry. I wouldn't be here today. You don't have to do this alone. You've got three on this call that would love to come alongside, and but plenty more resources out there to take you one step at a time forward. But Daryl, thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us. Thank you for the privilege to partner with Grace Place that we get. But thank you for your message to everyone else that's watching, and the encouragement that even in the midst of such a difficult season like a global pandemic, there's hope.
Yeah, there is hope. Jesus is still Lord. The Spirit is still working and bringing healing and life and brand new beginnings every day.
Amen. I know that's a message that transcends denomination, that transcends time, and I know your content is the same. And the invite to all those that are watching from multiple backgrounds to engage with that hope and proclamation of who Jesus is yesterday, today, and forever. So thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.